Hey
We
guys,
are already recording, Dan, because Scott usually comes into the meeting on fire.
are you on fire, Scott?
Scott, are you there?
Damn, I can't hear you guys at all.
We we hear you.
There we go.
There you go. What's up, bud?
Hey,
Not too
what's
much,
going on,
man.
Dan?
How you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you. Where are you? Are you where you look like you're on a beach? Where are you?
Uh, I'm in Fire Island in New York. Uh,
Okay,
yeah, I'm on holiday here with my family this week.
cool. I was just
Yeah,
glad to hear you say you weren't at Fire Festival. So,
yeah. It's so we're just chilling. How about yourselves? You guys doing okay?
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
home.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
got I
I'm
got no complaints. I got no complaints. All right, so Dan, I think you've done this with us before. Haven't you been on before?
I've never been on before, but
Get out of here. I blame Scott Leese for that.
first
It's
time.
totally Scott's fault
definitely
to,
my
to
fault.
not do that. So, gosh,
Terrible, terrible
terrible,
friend.
terrible,
Yeah,
terrible, terrible
we're doing
friend.
it now. That's what matters.
Yes. So, the quick thing is, we'll talk about anything you want to talk about. If there's something you don't want to talk about, put it in, message us in the chat so that we don't go down a certain path. We are actually already recording because we've decided that makes it more fun and interesting to record from the get go. Um, we'll go anywhere you want to go. At the end, we'll sort of flip it to you to say, what questions you have for us, and we'll kind of go from there. I think if you, I'll get your raw files if you want it, and I think this will drop on the 11th of August. So that's the
Um,
quick rundown.
okay,
But for everybody listening, this is the behind the scenes stuff we talk about most of the time before we actually hit record. But we're in a new mode these days.
awesome.
Babyface Scott wants something different.
New
So
era. It's a new era.
I
it's a
know
new
Scott's
era.
showing up without a beard, and I'm showing up with one. It's
We
Yeah,
flopped. We flip flopped.
cool.
completely. Completely. So before we jump in, welcome everybody to the Surf and Sales podcast. As we slowly creep to the 500th episode, we aren't there yet. Um, it might be early next year before we get there, Scott, just so you know, for if that's our milestone. But
We gotta try to get there. We gotta try to get there this year.
yeah, then we need to hustle.
Yep.
We are excited about Surf and Sales. The next event is in October in Portugal. We are officially sold out. But if people are interested, we do not spam you. Just go to surfandsales.com. Please just put your email address in. All we do is send people when we release the next date and the next location, which will be decided in the next month or so. But check us out. And then please check out our friends win.ai who are sponsoring the event. We appreciate them, supporting us and supporting all those folks going over there to Portugal. And another sponsor who, God, Scott, who is it? Vasco, right? It's Vasco, right? I'm sure they're going to love this one. But
Richard on the intro.
this is why it's fun though, because it's spontaneous and real. Like we make sure that it's there. Vasco, if you haven't checked out Vasco.app, it is a revenue architecture platform to improve your go-to-market speed and efficiency. And it actually helps with creating real dashboards with real forecasting versus guesstimate forecasting, which is sort of how Scott likes to do forecasting, I think. Right.
Yeah,
So
I don't like to do
that
forecasting at all,
yeah,
to be honest
exactly.
with
As we decided last night, Scott doesn't want to be in charge of anything. He just wants everything done his way. So
That's right.
that is
Yeah,
Scott Leese. That's his
that's right.
definition.
That's right. And you left out one sponsor, Provide the Slide, which is our good friend Dan O'Sullivan's company.
I didn't
And
know they were sponsoring.
his
Dan,
affiliation. Yes, he's a part of it. He's a part of it. Tell everybody about Provide the Slide. Let's start right there.
Sure. So, well, one, it's not a company; it's a NGO. But and I'm a volunteer for this NGO, and I assist with their fundraising. And I believe it is the first charity that Surf and Sales has ever sponsored.
Yes.
Um, and so you guys were kind enough to sponsor us and help make a donation to the charity as a component of Surf and Sales Europe. And so what Provide the Slide is a Swiss-German NGO that collects surfboards in Western Europe, and it uses surfboards, and it ships it to currently 10 countries across the West African coast. So primarily communities that are on the coast with access to good waves and typically no access to boards. and we're typically partnering with community development projects, NGOs in those places that are using surfing, for different types of youth empowerment, surf therapy, female empowerment programs. And so we've been around since 2019. To date, I think we've shipped 1,500 boards, again,
Wow.
to in different countries. And so, yeah, so that's what Provide the Slide does.
Yeah.
And again, Surf and Sales has been kind enough for the European edition to make us the first NGO sponsor. And so, and my role there is I help with fundraising. So, in the context of the charity, the boards themselves are all donated. So there's no cost there. But we, two of the guys who work, the NGO is run by 5 volunteers, and two of them work at a charity called Vel Africa that collects, it basically does the same thing with bikes. So they collect bikes in Western Europe and they ship them to West Africa. And so we're able to benefit that usually there's like 2 or 3 feet at the top of each shipping container that can't fit another bike. So you can get 40 or 50 surfboards in there.
Oh,
And
cool.
so anyways, we're able to ship fairly cost effectively, but we still have to fund that part and some of the other logistic fees and getting accessories for the board. So we want to make sure when we ship them, they have, fins, leashes, wax, a board bag. So anyway, so that's kind of how I'm assisting them and how Surf and Sales is supporting us.
Yeah, it's a killer cause, killer project. I think, hopefully one that will continue to support for the next few years in the foreseeable.
Where do you surf in? Like, I don't even know. Like, I mean, Africa's a huge continent, and of course, there's multiple beaches all the way around the continent. But like, where does one surf in Africa?
There's incredible ways throughout West Africa. I mean, the charity. I mean, one of the things we may talk about. It started. The first place we shipped to is a country called Liberia, and there's a town within Liberia called Robertsport that's on the coast, and it basically has 6 point breaks that kind of lined up where you have an exposed reef break, like an exposed reef, and then a sand bottom. So the waves would hit the reef and stand up. So you could kind of get into the wave pretty easily. And then when it hits the sand, it gets steep. And so for not incredible surfers, it's a great setup because you can kind of get into a wave pretty easy. And then, and then later in the wave, it'll get steep and more challenging. And there's 6 of them. So let's say the furthest one out, if it was 6 or 7 foot, the next one would be 5 or 6 foot. The next one would be 4 to 5 foot. So you can almost dial in which break you want. So there's incredible waves there. And that's kind of where we started. And then, they're all over. Last year I went to Angola. Angola's got incredible waves. South of Angola, I haven't been there. You have Namibia, which has a place called Skeleton Bay, which is one of the most famous waves, considered the longest barrel in the world. We've gotten to go to Sao Tome as an example, which is an island off the coast of West Africa. Incredible waves. Ghana, Senegal. So there's incredible waves throughout the West African coast, and often, pretty uncrowded. And we may talk about it later, but we helped produce a documentary about kind of Provide the Slide in some of those communities, and we might have a link in it when the episode launches. And you can kind of check out some of the waves there, but they're amazing. Yeah.
That sounds awesome. We might have to do a Surf and Sales.
I was just looking at, like, I'm pulling up Liberia. I'm looking at all that. Yeah. So that's cool.
For those who don't know you, talk a little bit about, how you spent the majority of your career. You've been running a major sales organization for a really long time, up until about 1.5 years ago, maybe, or so.
Yeah.
Tell everybody about your background.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say my background in sales, I worked for a company called TransPerfect, which is a large localization services and technology company, basically translation company. And I worked there for 26 years. So I started in 1997 when it was about a $5 million company. And I went on an extended sabbatical about 2 years ago. I think when I left, it was a $1.2 billion company. So I got to kind of ride it from 5 million to 1.2 billion. And my role was, for the last 15 years, was SVP of sales for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And so I led a number of our divisions in EMEA, and I kind of built a team for myself and no sales to a team of about 100 sales professionals spread across about 17 countries. And I think we generated 135 million in revenue the last year I was leading it. And that would be probably 90% outbound calling, and mostly targeting, large Fortune 500 companies and enterprise deals.
Yeah, 26 years outbounding to Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah,
Richard.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah, and then 2 years ago, I went on an extended sabbatical, which I'm currently on. And so now I mostly, I'm kind of a stay-at-home dad. My wife works. I have a daughter. I have a 16-year-old daughter that I help out, and then I work with several different NGOs, and I do some consulting work with just like go to market strategy for some startups that we've invested in.
So let's talk about going outbound, right? And specific to enterprise, right? If you had to start today, right?
Yeah.
Let's start at the beginning. What was outbound like for you to enterprise? What was the process like? How hard was it? How easy was it? And then where would you start today if you were trying to go outbound enterprise?
Yeah. Well, maybe to answer the first question. So, I mean, the way we approached it, our company is we had, let's say this, I sold effectively translation services. So
right.
No one in the history of the world has ever intentionally bought translation services. Like you would save up all year to like buy your kids some translation services for their birthday. So there's no value inherently in what we sold. And so by definition, what we always had to find is a business problem or a business opportunity that had a language component of it. So for example, a company wanted to launch a website in 30 countries. It has to be available in those languages. If that's a strategically important thing to that company and we can help them do it, they're interested. If there's no strategic need to have a language, website in a different language, they're not interested. So I would say the nature of our business forced us to really focus on strategic problems just because we needed to have that problem even to provide any services to do it.
So how do you determine a strategic problem at a high level, right? Use case is always very critical, right?
Yeah.
To your point, if you're doing something on web, I would assume some translation in terms of legalese and contracts and stuff like that. Yeah. Like, how do you try to determine that, particularly at that early stage? Like now it makes sense, right? It's 2025.
What we would do is, I mean, the way we would do it back then is we would open like when I started in 97, I opened our Miami office, which was myself in a room that we sublet from a law firm in a fancy building in Miami. And I would basically cold call every executive in Florida. We would send physical letters, like literally like a letter. I would sign them and I would send them. Like every executive in Florida got a letter from me at least a quarter with, like what we did. And again, mostly cold call. And so what ended up happening is actually like, if you thought about when the competitors we had at that time, what they would do is actually they would target the companies that spent the most on localization. So back then, the companies that would spend a lot of money on translation would be large software companies like Microsoft that like if they released a new update of Windows, they would have to localize all the different programs and all the technical manuals, or big like car manufacturers. So our competitors worked with those companies and we didn't have a lot of luck there, but we would just target every company. And what ended up happening is we found a bunch of use cases that we never would have thought of. So for example, my first big deal was with a cruise line. And I had just sent them a letter and I cold called their international marketing person and I got involved to an RFP. And they had a situation where they were, as a strategic company, they were building a bunch of new ships and they were, trying to fill them and they basically saturated the US market. So they knew they had to bring in guests from outside the US in order to fill the ships. And at the time, one of the biggest complaints on the ships was if you didn't speak English, you couldn't really follow what was going on and the cruise experience wasn't really good. So this company was basically committing like $2 billion to build a bunch of ships dependent on a strategy that they could bring in people outside America. And anyone who came on board a ship who didn't speak English had a bad experience. So
how do you find the person? Because, there's not really someone, in my opinion, I don't know, in charge of, making sure everything translates into a specific language, right?
So it's specific to the role. So the point I was going to get at is what would happen is we would randomly find a use case And then once we solved that use case for one of those companies, we would then roll up every other company in that industry. So we would, we would just go super, super wide, and then suddenly you might hit on, a random problem you wouldn't have thought of. Like, as an example, our biggest division was a pharmaceutical division that did localization services for clinical trials. So if you were to run a clinical trial, and you wanted to do it globally, you have to ask people questions throughout that trial, and that data and those questions have to be 100% perfect. So if you were asking someone if they had a fever, and you were supposed to ask them if they had a rash, and now 2 years later, you have 2 years of data that's incorrect, and you can't go to the FDA and apply for a drug. So, that would be a use case I would never think of, but actually it's a gigantic use case and a huge driver. So again, basically we would go wide and we would find a use case, and then we would just try to roll up every company who had that use case.
Got it.
Do you think that you would do something? Do you think you would do something different with the strategy if you were starting today?
I mean, I think what I didn't really know this at the start, but what I came to learn is that usually you'll never, like, companies have, usually 3 or 4 strategies they're trying to implement that the CEO is trying to make happen, like existential crises that, like, hey, in the next let's say in the next 12 to 24 months, we need to execute on these 3 things. And if you can figure out what those 3 things are, which often you can, if you read an annual report or you read an interview with the CEO, and you can show how what you do has any vague connection to solving one of those problems, you often will get that. That's the way you win. So whenever I won a big deal, that's how I won it. Is this company had a strategic, an existential problem. I was able to show that something I did might address that problem, and that's how I won. So it's a long way of saying is if I started today, that's exactly what I would do. Is I would I would pick 5 or 6 companies that, if I win these, like I always do this with my team, which is like, if you could win one company and only one company for the rest of your life, who's that company? And then once you know who that company is, like, okay, what do they care about? What's important to them? What is the CEO communicating is strategically important? Could I take what I do and try to see if I could, like, reverse engineer, like, what impact I could have? So for example, if I have a product that is going to increase, let's say, pipeline by 30%. So I can even understand what their revenue is today. What is 30% more mean for them? Have they articulated growth ambitions? Does it look like they have a plan that's going to guarantee that growth, or are they still looking for ideas on how to get there? And then I think if you can feed into that some different ideas. Sorry, that's my daughter.
That's all right.
Hey, Lola. So anyway, so that would be what I would do today. And I think actually, if you look at, like, what happens a lot in sales tech, it's sort of optimizing steps of that process. So a lot of sales tech is like, how do you pull research on the company or the prospect? A lot of it is like, how do you do ROI analysis or all these different things? But, the most important thing is, like, do you have a value prop for that prospect that is specific to their ROI? Like, what are the KPIs that they track? What are the KPIs they're trying to deliver on? And within those KPIs, do you have something that could, affect that KPI, and really trying to tie it to the way they think about it versus the way you think about it? And so anyways, that's a long answer, but that's kind of how I would do it today. I would have maybe more tools to do that research, and obviously, things like,
some of that, I would imagine some of that stuff would expedite that process.
Yeah.
Compared to how you had to do it 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, it would. I mean, but I think there's a creativity element to it. That's, you still have to kind of really think about putting yourselves in the shoes of the client, and what do they care about and what's important to them. And, that has to come from doing, deep analysis and reading a lot of the company and reading their case studies and reading about, the CEO interviews and their annual report and things like that. And I think you have to actually physically do that to internalize it.
How much of that stuff would you include in the initial letter that you would send a company? Because I heard you say we'd send a letter and then I'd call them, right? So like the initial letter.
Back then the letters were pretty generic, like, because we were sending, I would send out 500 letters a day or something crazy like that. So, but I would say today, like, or even when I was working, if I was to send someone an email, I might spend a day on that email. And I would treat that email like a haiku, where, like, I have 4 lines and I have to somehow boil down, 4 pages of research into 4 lines. And I work off the assumption that no one reads any more than 4 lines. So if you can't get their attention in those 4 lines, you're probably not going to get their attention. And so
I got to pause you for a second. Scott, he's like me. He'd spend all day on one email.
Like that was the thing that I heard, and I was like, oh
I saw you twitch. Yeah. I saw you start to twitch a little bit.
Yeah,
you know.
But the quote that I liked, that I liked was, I would treat it like a haiku. I got 4 lines. That's it. How do I make those 4 lines as powerful as possible? And I think that's actually really good advice for people listening.
And again, that's, where you would, what might be in those 4 lines is if you had determined that, like, hey, listen, the CEO has articulated that they have a 30% growth rate. It looks like you guys are going to have to generate an extra $10 million in revenue this year. I'm not sure, if you guys have that already worked out, but we do have a solution that typically can generate an additional 30% in pipeline. If you're interested, I'd be happy to talk through how it might apply in your context. But if you're using their statistics or their points, or reminding them of something that the CEO has articulated publicly, and you're using numbers, it's you can do it. It's not like every email I sent to someone I got a response, or all those emails worked, but those were the only emails that worked. Like like if I get an email that's 5 paragraphs, I don't even read it, just because I just look at it and I'm like, that's just too much commitment.
Too much. Yeah.
I purposely write Scott long emails so that it causes him pain.
It works.
Yeah.
So let's talk about today.
Yeah.
Right? I loved your point about messaging, right? Like, treat it like that is, I think that's going to be the title of the episode. That was a great, great line. Even though you left 2 years ago, I know you pay attention to sales.
Yeah.
From your perspective, in the last 2 years, what are the biggest things that have made you go, wow, that's amazing, or holy cow, that's going to make it even harder? Aside from AI and noise, right? Like, I'm curious to your thoughts with all your experience.
Yeah, I think one challenge is that, I don't know that the sales experience has gotten better. Like, if you were to think about, I've had some experience in my previous role, and even in some stuff I've done, on my sabbatical, where I'm interacting with companies that sell, for example, SaaS software. And I don't feel like I don't come away from those experiences going like, holy shit, that was an incredible customer, success experience. I feel like, you might
even through the sales process, you're not even talking about customer success.
Yeah, I'm saying
after being a client, through the actual buying process.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of things, you might have a demo you might have a call with an SDR, and then, you get a call with an AE who's asking you what you covered on the previous call. And then you might get, a bunch of random emails that aren't from the person who you talk to. And so, I think a lot, what happened is they tried to sort of moneyball the sales team, all right, we got a person who does this, and we have a person who does this, and we have a person who does this. But, really, as a customer, what you're looking for is someone who's just going to say, I got you, I've listened to you, I understand what you need, and this is how we're going to deliver that, and go away and deliver that. And so I think one thing I think AI, if anything, has probably made that worse. You have a lot of people who might pull research but don't know why it matters or what's important. They don't understand the big picture. And I think the challenge is, how you do have access to all this research, but if you don't really understand why it matters or what the big picture is it's hard to use it. I'm somebody who, if I can understand the big picture, I can fit specific details into that pretty easily. But if I don't understand the bigger picture, it's hard for me to do that. So, I think I know for me personally, the thing that really transformed my career was reading. There's just books that help me. An example is a book called the 10-Day MBA. So I didn't have an MBA, and I would often get insecure if I was pitching to, senior executives and, afraid I was going to use the wrong word, or, they would say some acronym I didn't know. That was a really helpful thing for me to just understand, how does a company work? What does HR do? What does accounting do? What is everyone's role? What is business strategy? There's a book called The McKinsey Way, which is about how McKinsey approaches engagements. And that was a really helpful book to think about, how do these guys and girls who charge, $2,000-$3,000 an hour, how do they approach a CEO and interview a CEO? And so I think one of the challenges, I think people today read less, and that's
Yeah.
how I learned. So I don't know how else you would learn, but that just happened to be the way that I was able to figure some of these things out and then incorporate them into my approach. And
You're
so
on TikTok, man. Like, what are you
Yeah,
talking
no, well,
about?
that's the challenge, is that the sellers of today are learning in 30-second sound bites,
yeah,
not in a commitment of, I'm making a number up, but like 100-page book. Maybe it takes you, a week or two, 3 weeks, an hour a day or
yeah,
whatever. Like there's prolonged, sustained focus, attention, learning versus a 30-second soundbite. And that
Yeah.
is a massive difference in how the new generation of salespeople are learning skills, acquiring skills and information. Not
yeah.
necessarily for the better, in my opinion, either.
Yeah, and I think depending on what you're targeting. So for me, like typically we were trying to get like $1 million deals, that would be, $1 million a year deals. So to get one of those deals, you really have to, like it requires something exceptional to happen. If you had a product that's like, I don't know, it's a $100 a month, subscription, and you're trying to get 10 subscriptions, and maybe you have a simple ROI calculation,
Yeah.
maybe it works. But if you're going to a company and trying to get them to give you $1 million, if that deal goes wrong, that person gets fired. Like if that deal gets screwed up and you spend $1 million of your company's money on something that doesn't work, that's gonna be terrible for that person. And so I think in those levels, you do have to read, and you do have to do a lot of outside knowledge, and you do have to be able to come into an enterprise and justify giving you $1 million and show that you're a serious person and you'll treat it seriously,
Yeah.
and you're not going to get them
And
fired.
one of the things that I always admired about you was you have to do a ton of traveling. And I don't mean, New York to San Francisco traveling. Like I remember one time we were talking in Costa Rica and you're like, oh, I got to go to Dubai, and then I'm in, Argentina, and then I'm in China. I'm making the countries up. But I was
Yeah.
like, good God, man, this guy's crisscrossing the planet. But that requires incredible depth of sort of
Emotional
local,
intelligence.
yeah, like local salesmanship. You got to understand the culture, right? And people behave and think and buy differently in Switzerland, where you've been living for a long time,
Yeah.
versus California versus Japan and all this kind of stuff. How would you advise the sellers on your team, to really like deeply understand so many potential different territories and the stylistic differences and how to approach going after some of these accounts?
Yeah. I mean, well, I would say one is, I mean, for the most part, I was deferential to people from those countries. So like in England, I moved to England in 2002, and I sold there for, I mean, and I also, by the way, I also was, I had my own clients. So I had like a $10 million book of my own clients that I didn't like, I wasn't the day-to-day manager, but I was a point of escalation on those accounts. And, so what I would do, so I was selling myself when I got to England, but then when I started hiring, I realized I had to get people from those markets. I mean, just linguistically.
Yeah.
So what I would do is I actually did this thing I called the sales farm, where I would basically hire a young person, usually pretty straight out of college from a country, and they would come work with me in London for 6 months and just sit next to me. So I would have like someone from France, someone from the Netherlands, someone from Switzerland, someone from Sweden, and they would just call all day. And so I could hear them on the phone all day because they were sitting next to me. So we could quickly debrief when they had a call, and they could hear me on the phone as well. And then what we would usually do is, like, when I hired them, we would figure out, like, all right, what are the top five, companies in that country? Because oftentimes if you're going into a new market, if you can win the most known companies, like, everything else becomes
It
easier.
softens the landscape
You're
everywhere.
starting
Yeah.
at the top
You
down.
go into Germany and you
Cool.
win Porsche, you're in good shape, and so what we would do is kind of the approach I had, which is we would start to do research on each of those companies. And I would usually just train them up enough so that they could make what I would call like a strategic cold call. So, a good intro that would make it, get someone open to talking to them. And then we would do what I called question rodeo, which is like, okay, just ask questions as long as you can until they throw you off the call, basically. And if they did a good job of that, you would understand a lot of information about what their situation is. We would have some idea, depending on the industry, what the strategic problem we typically solve for them is, and we could understand if it's real and if they have that problem. And then I would have them book meetings. And so we would say, like, in a month we're going to go to Sweden, and they would just focus on booking meetings for that month, and we would go, do meetings together. most of the time you could kind of get away with English. Sometimes it would be tough, or they would be an intermediary. But my ultimate goal was like I would be the face of a deal till we won one big deal, and then they would become the face of the deals with me in the background, and then eventually they just did their own deals. So they would then I had one person who had sat next to me for 6 months, and I knew how they thought and they knew how I thought, they would go back to their country and start building the operation from there. And
Yeah.
so, and you definitely learn, like, there's definitely in different countries, it's easy, like, it's easy to sell as an American in England. I learned when I went to Switzerland. I had a young guy who worked for me, and we would go to meetings in Switzerland, and I realized immediately that, like, Swiss people would much rather buy from a 23-year-old Swiss person who knows nothing than a 45-year-old American who knows everything. And
That's
so,
funny.
But you wouldn't know that. Like, you wouldn't know that until you experience it. That's a beautiful thing.
The patience of that strategy, I think, is very different than what you see across most sales orgs, especially earlier startups. Even
I can tell you that it was this way in the 90s.
Like, yeah,
it was always this way.
I can't imagine any sales job right now where somebody gives you 6 months to learn like that.
Yeah.
Not to mention move you to another country and pay for your housing. Yeah. I assume. Like, I'm texting Scott in the back, like, oh my God, this would be a dream job coming out of college.
Well, right? I mean, companies hire. I mean, another way of phrasing that is you were an SDR, right? You were just
that's how I'm thinking of it.
And you happen to work in an office, so that does happen. Obviously, people hire SDRs and they put SDRs in offices together. So
that they don't have 6 months.
But they don't have a 6 month,
and they don't have a coach daily like that. Like,
and also the nature of what we did is it wasn't like necessarily just a product you were going to buy. We were taking over. For example, if we were translating someone's website, we had to integrate with their content management system. We had to integrate with their CRM. We had to do a bunch of different stuff to get set up. So the deals themselves just couldn't be closed really, in 6 months. And we actually often had to generate the deal because we had to go to them and say, like, often people were dealing with translation in an anecdotal way or having someone in the office do it. So you had to kind of, it took a while to build up to getting someone.
And then you'd go fly out there and get in person quite a bit. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'd always try to meet in person whenever possible. We did a lot of events, client events and stuff like that. So.
Yeah.
Well, I got a question for you. Because we talk to a lot of people in Europe, right? And they always want to expand to the US, right?
Yeah.
You talked about a very unique way that you did it in Europe and globally. What's the advice you give to founders these days if they're based outside the US and they want to break into the US market? Do you get that? Because it's a different animal, right? As you said, every country is a different animal, and everybody, it feels like they so much want to come to the US because it's such a big marketplace, which is great.
Yeah.
What's the advice you give those founders about breaking through?
Well, I would say the US is probably like the one market I don't know how to break into because, like, I was always going into Europe. But I would say, I think in anything,
should they live here first? If you're going to sell into the US market, should they move to the US?
100%. I think the one challenge in the US, and you actually have this in Germany too, is there's not like one city. So for example, in Europe, it's easier because if you're going to set up in England, you're going to set up in London. If you're going to set up in France, you're going to set up in Paris. If you're going to set up in America, where do you set up? And so that some of that's industry specific. So depending on what industry you're in, there's going to be regions of America. If you're targeting tech startups, you might want to be in, Austin or San Francisco. If you're targeting, I don't know,
oil and gas,
oil and gas, you want to be in Texas. If you're targeting financial services, maybe you want to be in New York. So I think it's kind of industry specific to be there, and and also having been gone from the sales game for a couple of years, I feel like it's very different. For example, when I worked, we were very focused on meeting people in person. Like, one of the things we did as a company is we would open offices, even like 1 or 2 people offices in crazy amounts of cities. I think we have offices in 130 cities.
Wow.
And the reason to do that is that you could meet people in person, and you could, clients and say, hey, listen, I'm across the street. If you have a problem, I'm available to walk over at any point. I'm going to be here for you and make sure it all goes well. So, but again, I think in America, the problem is, where do you set up? I think hiring salespeople in America is, it's kind of different than Europe, I think, in many ways.
It's more expensive.
Yeah. And more, well, yeah, I think more complicated. I think salespeople in America are used to being in like a sales system and, have experience of one component of that system and very much expect to have the infrastructure in place for them to sell. Like I think salespeople in America are almost like, you have to build a race car and they can maybe drive it. But if you don't have a race car, then they're not even be able to really.
There's definitely a difference between the first salesperson you hire at a startup versus the 12th salesperson, and certainly at a mid-market or enterprise company, right? Like I agree with you. It's the expectations
think about the entitled US AE who's sitting around waiting for warm leads all day long, for example.
Who would do that?
Doesn't want to prospect anymore.
I would say the one piece of advice I could give, or the one mistake I made going the other way when I started out, is I had this idea that like I was very busy because I had my own book of business. So if I hired someone, they needed to know my industry well and they needed to be good at sales. And I sort of viewed those as a continuum, like, oh, here's their, how great of a salesperson is this person? How much do they know about the industry? And if they knew a lot about the industry, I would cheat a little bit on how good they were in sales and like view that as balancing it out. Yeah. And what I came to realize,
go ahead. No, go ahead, Dan.
What I came to realize is the knowledge of the industry mattered zero,
right?
And skill level as a salesperson mattered 1,000%.
Preach, preach. We've been shouting that from the rafters for a long time. Yeah.
And it's really personal laziness that drove that decision, because I was like, I can't really spend time training this person, or I can't, I don't have time to deal with
it. That's exactly the mistake that founders make. You owned it and you said it's personal laziness, and the founders always say like, I want somebody turnkey. I don't have time to teach them this or invest in that and whatnot. Yeah.
Or part of it is they don't know how to sell either.
Yeah, or you need to do some, you need to set up the CRM, you need to do some events, you need to do some marketing, and so they try to get someone who can do a little bit of all those different things. Right. But again, the hardest skill to find is like an exceptional salesperson. Like there's way more successful doctors and lawyers and investment bankers than there are great salespeople. It's a incredibly rare skill, incredibly hard to find. And so, I put all my focus on finding one of those people before, and to find those people before they know that they're a great salesperson. Like,
right.
Yeah, you got to get the rising stock of that great salesperson.
You want to get Cristiano Ronaldo when he's like 16.
That's right.
Then he's it costs 50 million pounds to get him to transfer to Saudi Arabia. Right. I was always trying to find those people super young and then get them in my system and get them successful and try to keep them.
Cool. Good. Well, we're going to give you a chance to ask us a question. First, want to give shout out to our sponsor. Obviously, provide the slide, Dana Sullivan. Please check that out. Great cause. What a cool thing to do to help people globally, which I think is really, really nice, and the empowerment side of that. Also, want to give a shout out to Vasco for supporting us and Win.ai for supporting us. So please support our sponsors, because we could not be here without them. Dan, what do you want to ask us? You're 2 years into your sabbatical. Do you even have a sales question you want to ask us, or you want to ask us some existential question?
I didn't have anything prepped, but I'm good at questions. Well, we'll see, I guess. So one thing we didn't talk about is I think I'm the most, I don't know what you would call it, but the person who's attended Surf and Sales the most.
Yeah, you get a jacket like Saturday Night Live.
I'm like 5. I think I've done it 5 times. So I think
he's got a gold jacket. He's got a gold jacket.
So one question for you guys is, how has Surf and Sales evolved? Let's say over you guys have been running what, 6 years, 5 years?
This is year 8, I think.
8.
Oh, 8
7 or 8. Yeah.
And from your original conception of I think you guys wanted to do it because you just wanted to go to Costa Rica and hang out with your families and then figure out a way to monetize that. But how would you guys say it's evolved philosophically? Like, do you feel like the intent of it going into it and what you think people get out of it is kind of the same as it was at the start, or you feel like that's evolved?
I think it's evolved a little bit because the sort of growth and importance of meeting face to face, building a network, having a community, all of that really intensified after COVID.
Yeah.
and people have been seeking that out in various ways more and more. So that changed a little bit. That was not a part of really like the initial, kind of vision. And I think a happy accident of it all was um, a lot of people have come through and had like sort of life breakthroughs, if you will. They come with existential crisis and they leave with some sort of breakthrough. I can think of a woman who completely overhauled her business. I can think of another woman who pivoted her business a little bit. I can think of a couple guys who, got a little bit of spark of ambition to do something a lot more. And we've had a lot of people come to us and say, I really wasn't expecting this, but it was kind of made a huge impact on my life,
Yeah.
and to have some of those kind of pretty powerful stories from people. Now I feel like that is a big part of what we're hoping to create the space to provide for
Yeah.
people. And I don't think that I wasn't at least thinking of it in that kind of scope
Yeah.
and scale. Those are a couple things that stand out for me.
Yeah, I think about even for myself, you guys, at Surf and Sales, you guys do the Crow's Nest. So it's like a place you can go and at the end of the night, and Richard and Scott hang out up there, and you come and bring your questions or problems. And I remember when I was trying to go on my sabbatical, I was asking you guys some advice or suggestions. I think, Scott, you said two things, which was hire your replacement and document everything.
Yeah.
And I ended up taking that advice. I actually wrote like a 200-page manual
I
of
remember
like,
gave it to us.
You sent it to me to review. Yeah.
Yeah.
and it ended up being super helpful because actually it forced me to actually think about like, all right, what is it that someone would need to know if I wasn't here, or what do I get questions on? And it really smoothed the way for the transition because it actually allowed me to show like, hey, it's on page 52, it's on page 54.
Yeah, here's the playbook. Yeah, go for
So
it.
I would say that was a personal example of just some random thing that happened in the Crow's Nest that ended up actually being a facilitator to allow me to, kind of go on my sabbatical. And I would say in a way where I felt like I had, I had I documented everything that I know. So there's not, it really made it easy to step away. So I'm thankful for that. And also, I would say like as someone, maybe just to do a quick surf and sales plug, as someone who's gone 5 times, some of the things I've gotten out of it. I mean, one is just the surfing aspect of it. So to have an excuse to go surfing and get to surf every day, is great. And one challenge I have as a 53-year-old is like, I can surf for 3 hours, basically, tops. And then, you have the rest of the day with nothing to do. So like with surf and sales, it was like, you got to surf, as much as you could surf. And then you got to have, exposure to this great content. At my company, because we hired a lot of young salespeople, I didn't get a lot of exposure to salespeople in other contexts. And one of the powerful things about surf and sales is, you get to meet, 15 sales professionals at different companies and different industries and doing different things. And then also it tended to be a diversity of level. Yeah. So you get people who are SDRs or BDRs, but also people who are SVPs of sales. And like for me, it's hard for me to have candid conversations with junior people on the team because you're just, if you're the senior person, it skews everything because they don't want to tell you like exactly the truth. Mm-hmm. Where if you get to meet someone, an SDR or BDR who's, you don't really know, and they're going to be super candid with you, you really get deep insights into how different, generations of sellers are thinking. You learn a lot about sales tech and like what different products people are using, what's working well. So it's been very powerful. For me, it was a great asset that I originally signed up just because I was looking for an excuse to surf. And then it ended up being something that actually got a lot of other benefits. So
yeah.
So
we all wanted to go surf and have a little vacation, and it turned into something bigger and better and a little more special.
It was an experiment by a couple of guys who were like, let's try something crazy and different and see if we can pull it off. And we did, and it just created, we did all this pre-COVID, right? So we did this in 2018, and I remember where we started. The baseline was, as Scott always said, was we want to create something smaller that is intimate, where you get to know people. And that translated eventually into what I called the in-between moments, right? It's you're not just out there surfing, you're sitting out there with 3 or 4 other people waiting on the wave. So you're having these conversations, business life or whatever, And then to the point that you brought up, Dan, you know, there are these other moments outside of the content and outside of the surfing where you just get to connect with humans on a different level, right? And that was, I think that was our intent. We didn't know how to articulate it quite that well, other than to say we just wanted something that wasn't in a big city in a hotel conference room.
Yeah.
Right. We know intimacy was needed at that human to human level, particularly because sales is such a lonely existence.
Yeah.
Right. It is a team sport in many ways, but ultimately you're still responsible for your number. And this was a place to sort of combine all that together. So I think that was it. Everything surf and sales has turned into has been 80% more organic than it has been strategic by us. Would you say that's fair, Scott?
Yeah, that's definitely fair.
90%.
A perfect example is most of the reason probably that we're going to Portugal and having the event in Portugal is because Dan has volunteered and spearheaded all the like boots on the ground stuff. He knows the area and doing all that, right? So, you know, we have Dan to thank for the first Euro Summit.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one? I have one more question for you guys. If
yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So I'm a big book guy. So I would say I'll ask each of you, what would be if you could recommend one book from a sales perspective? It doesn't necessarily have to be a sales book. It could be a general business perspective. And then if you were to say one book from like a personal, like, you know, life perspective, like, hey, if I could get someone to read one sales or business related book and one personal like development book, which would be those books?
Wow.
So I have a hard time differentiating straight up business books from life books because I feel like the life books are as much about business as they are life, right? I mean, sure, you could go read the little black book of sales or red book of sales and all those things and never split the difference, or the seller's journey or addicted to the process, right? We might as well plug our own books, right, Scott?
Yeah.
So, why not? But the two books that I think have meant the most to me in the last couple of years, one was Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, because it's not about him being a movie star. It's about moving through life and how you do that. And he gives some great examples of context. And then the other book that hint, Scott should read is Just Let Them, which I think is a great book about understanding. We all say control what you can control, but nobody teaches us how to do that and how to navigate the emotions of that. Because we can say, oh, I can't control it, but it helps you understand, well, how do I navigate my own emotions around what I can't control? Because that doesn't mean it doesn't frustrate us, right? And so it acknowledges that side of it. So those are the two books. The Just Let Them one is my latest and favorite that I've read a couple of times.
Nice. Got Addicted to the Process?
Yeah, Addicted to the Process for sure. That was the most memorable since I wrote it. I think about I'm like a simplistic reader in the sense, like I don't really like reading 1,000-page book. I want to get in, get out. What was a couple things that I learned? And I like to learn things that help me discover stuff about myself. So there was two books about habits, Atomic Habits, which everybody has heard of. There's another one that is less popular called The Power of Habit. And these two books helped me sort of understand some of my patterns and how I formed them and how I could recreate new patterns. And it's been very valuable to me over the last few years with all the different life changes and everything that I've gone through. And then a real simple book, which is great, especially for people who have a sports background like me, is called Toughness. And it's written by Jay Billis, who's a college basketball analyst. And he talks a lot about Duke and their history there and everything. And it's just a real simple concept of, how to be gritty, how to be resilient, how to tough it out. And I think that those are all of those books are helpful both for sales and for life. I would tell people to look at those.
Nice. Yeah. Cool. All right.
What are your book recommendations? What are you reading?
I mean, I'm reading all kinds of crazy. I'm reading a book about Mickey Dora right now, who's a famous kind of rogue surfer, and then a book called The Fall and Rise of Great American Cities. It's like a famous book about.
See, that kind of stuff I like.
Yeah.
I'm deep in this the people's history of the United States
Yeah.
book. I like that kind of rise and fall of great
But
cities.
I would say I mean, there's a book called like the Magic of Thinking Big, which is it's kind of a book about like goal setting, but it's kind of transformational in my life. And then I think at a personal level, there's a book called Authentic Happiness, which was written by a guy named Martin Seligman, and he was like the head of the American Psychiatry Association for 30 years. And basically his distinction is like when he got into psychiatry, instead of studying like mental illness like schizophrenia, he studied happiness like clinically for 30 years. And so it's like basically an analysis of like clinically what is the things that make you actually happy. And so it's a very good way to kind of understand like how happiness works and how life works. And so that was one of my books that I most recommend.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Mr. O'Sullivan. We appreciate it. Where can people get a hold of Provide the Slide? Is it providetheslide.com? What is it?
Yeah, maybe I'll do a quick plug. So, one of the components of the Surf and Sales sponsorship is we've committed, or Surf and Sales is committed to match any donations to Provide the Slide by up to $5,000. So anyone who's interested in finding out about, yes, you can go to providetheslide.com, and it shows all the partner destinations. You can donate on that page. There's also a documentary that will be released in early September on Apple TV and awesome. Amazon Prime, which is kind of about kind of what the charity does. And again, it focuses on Liberia as one specific community, but it kind of shows some of the impact of those boards. And so hopefully in early September, people can check out the documentary online. And as I say, if you want to, you can go to providetheslide.com.
We'll definitely check it out.
We can't take boards in America yet. We don't have infrastructure for donations yet, but people can support financially, and hopefully one day we'll come to America.
That's awesome.
Cool. Well, it's been a pleasure, man. Good to see you. And
we'll see you in a couple months, Dan.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to.
I think we're 10 weeks away, maybe 11 weeks away from Portugal.
Oh my gosh, getting close.
Yeah,
getting close.
Stay healthy. Everybody stay healthy before we go there.
Yes, that's true. All right, Dan. Good to see you, bud.
See you guys.